Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Cat Chat Live. My name is Nancy Stevens, and I manage parent and family communications here at the University of Kentucky. As always, I'm really glad to have you here with us today. I'm excited about today's topic and think it'll give you a lot of good food for thought. Our topic today is college conflicts and family superpowers, how to be your student's secret weapon. And as we've been talking about in recent Cat Chat Lives, today we're going to get a chance to delve into ways that you can support your student if they ever find themselves in conflict living here in community at UK. That could be with classmates, roommates, but we want you to have some things to keep in mind if your student comes to you and is telling you about a situation they're experiencing. But before we get to that, I want to review a few quick housekeeping items for those of you who may not have joined us for a Cat Chat Live before. We'll have some slides that we'll be going through with you, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. You can use Zoom's Q&A feature to communicate with us. We'll plan on spending no more than an hour together today because we know folks are busy. And as we come up with websites and other important information for you, my colleague Kate will be putting those in the chat, so you can be looking to the chat for things that you may want to look at after the webinar's over. If you're not able to join us for the entirety of today's webinar, it is being recorded and will be posted in the Cat Chat family community. It says in the next few days on the slide, but it will likely be either today or tomorrow at the very latest. We know you may have other questions about UK. Anytime that you have those UK questions, you can email the Office of Family and Civic Engagement at parents@uky.edu, and they'll make sure that you get the support you need and get you connected with whoever you may need to chat with on campus. We always like to hear your feedback, and so after today's webinar, you'll see a link to a survey, and we would really appreciate it if you would take a moment or two and let us know what you thought about today's webinar and what other topics you may like to see in our Cat Chat Live series. I'll put a quick plug in for a few of the Cat Chat Live dates we have coming up in the next few weeks. This is the last one we have this week, but on Monday we'll be back with colleagues from the Office of Student Organizations and Activities. They'll be previewing K-Week, our fall welcome week for incoming students, and then talking more broadly about how students get involved on the University of Kentucky campus. A week from today, I'll be joined by colleagues from Student Account Services, the Office of Student Financial Aid and Scholarships, and our Financial Wellness Center. And they'll be talking about both short and long-term financial topics that impact students and families. So I hope you can join us for that. And then in our final week of the summer series, we'll be looking at wellness and safety. Now, for any of these that you plan to join us live, registration links can be found in the Cat Chat family community. If you can't join us live, there's no need to register. You'll just watch those recordings after the fact in Cat Chat. Always have to put in a plug for the Cat Chat family community, and I really hope that this has been a good source of information, from the event calendars to the posts, ways that you can easily share information with your student, ways that you can ask questions, leave comments, and connect with others there as well. So that's my plug for Cat Chat family community. So without further ado, I want to turn things over to Molly Huffman from the Office of Student Conduct. Really appreciate Molly being here today. And I think you're going to learn some very good information and have some tools in the tool belt in case your student finds themselves in a situation where they're in conflict and comes to you for advice and support. Molly, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nancy. I appreciate you guys having me. First off, want to say that the Office of Student Conduct works really closely with a lot of different offices on campus, this just being one of them. So we try to show up in different spaces that we can to talk about different issues that we can hopefully provide some support for your students on. So today, like Nancy said, we're going to be talking about college conflicts and some of the ways that you can be your student's secret weapon. So, getting right into that, talking about the Office of Student Conduct in general. So, we always like to start with talking about our mission and goals. And I won't read through each of these word by word, but overall, we really are committed to an educational process when it comes to the Office of Student Conduct. I think that a lot of people think of our office as the principal's office, but really we want to make sure that we are preparing students to move forward and develop those lives of purpose and meaning, like many of the goals of the offices at UK. So we talk about personal responsibility, peer accountability with students. We and try to encourage them to think about the impact of their actions for themselves and for the community. We want to talk with them about um, how they can address conflict in a safe, healthy way. And that's what we'll be diving into today. So, this is a large part of what we do in our office. We work with the Office of Residence Life pretty frequently in talking about roommate conflicts, which is where a lot of our things will be today. But these skills are going to be applicable to any kind of conflict that your student may have. Mostly we like to tell people that we understand that conflict is really challenging. It is not an easy thing for someone, who is a freshman at a new place. But it's also not easy for me, even working in the office that I do. I think everyone has some kind of uncomfortability in some sense or another. So we want to talk through some ways that you can be that secret superpower for your student. So starting off, I think it's important to address what is conflict. We um, always talk through these different definitions when we meet with students. There is a certain sense of a negative connotation when it comes to conflict, even as a term. Um, I think that one of the biggest goals that I have when I talk with students that are in conflict is to change that connotation and talk through what conflict really means. So, one of the definitions that we use identifies conflict as a struggle between two parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, things like that. But really, what's important to know is that conflict is an inevitable part of any relationship of value. Um, One of the jokes that we typically make is that you're not really in conflict with a jerk who cuts you off in traffic in the morning. It may aggravate you, but you don't have a relationship of value with that person, so that's not a real conflict. It can be a signal that there's a need for some kind of change or evolution in a relationship. So this can happen between two people, an individual and a larger group, individuals being in conflict with the community and the expectations of the community. Same things with organizations and the organization's expectations. Um, so it may seem um, elementary to talk about what conflict even is, but I think that reframing that connotation to it being something that's going to happen when you have some shared goal with somebody, some group, um, can change the way that we feel about conflict and where that starts. So one of the most, I think, revolutionary things that I have discovered when working with students in conflict, and how how to identify what their conflicts are and what the root of those conflicts are, is something called the PIN model. So PIN stands for position, interest, and need. Um, so position is typically where we start off. So the role that we want to play as my office and the Office of Student Conduct, as your student secret superpower, you want to try to help the student get from that top level of their position down to their interest, and then finally to what they actually need. What is the root of the conflict? So, one of the examples that we use, this can be for students who are living on campus, living off campus. Something you may hear from your student that we hear from students is they come in and they say, "My roommate is so messy and I just want them to move out." Well, something that we know is that that's typically not going to be the first step when a conflict comes up, when dealing with things like cleanliness. Wanting them to move out This seems to come from a place of an elevated emotional state. This is the easy fix. This is what I want done, and we'll move on from there. Um, when you first ask, a student what the conflict is, this is probably where you're going to hear their position. Um, Helping your student move from only seeing their position to seeing maybe the other student's position, and to getting down to those interests and needs. You want to do that by asking different questions and prompting some kind of deeper thought about the situation. So in this, maybe you think, okay, well, why do you think your roommate hasn't been helping clean up? Do they typically uphold their part of that agreement? Is there something going on right now with that student that's preventing them from doing so? And maybe this gets that student thinking about the other individual's perspective. This may be where their interest comes out when you're talking with them. And they say, well, yeah, my roommate typically does, do their part of the chores. They're supposed to wash the dishes and they usually do, but they haven't been lately. I know they've had some family stuff going on, but it just doesn't feel fair that I'm having to do more chores to have to keep the room clean. So this is where you find out why the student feels what they feel, why they want what they want. So they think they're doing more chores in order to keep things tidy, and ultimately to them that feels unfair. So from here, when you hear a student say that, and you've identified that as their interest, you want to help them get that to the root of the conflict, identify the root of the conflict. So the needs place, um, what you're really hearing someone say there is that they want to live in a clean environment where the responsibilities are shared. So maybe if you're having this conversation with your student, and this example comes up, maybe something that you could respond with and help them reflect on is, well, it seems like you really care about keeping the room clean, and you've been putting in extra help, an extra effort to help pick up your roommate's slack. And that to them is going to help them express to you and hopefully eventually express to their roommate um, what they're feeling and what the root of that is. This is helpful when communicating with other people about what you're feeling in a conflict because it brings you down from that emotional state. And ultimately, when you think about two people who have, this pin model triangle, if they have a relationship of value, those needs section, the bottom, if you put those two triangles together, those are going to intersect first. You're going to intersect at the needs place before anything else. And that's where you're going to find that shared value. In this situation, I'm sure that, you know, both students want to live in a clean environment, want to do, things fairly. So once you've identified that, you can have a conversation about how those needs may be met. So I want to talk through 5 different superpowers for supporting your student through a conflict. I'm going to give you what those superpowers are, and then we'll talk about some tips on how to get those going. So the first one is going to be holding up the mirror. So as a parent, you're going to know your student better than anyone. Now's the time to be having the conversations about the type of roommate that you think they may be and what they want from a roommate relationship. So, what we mean by this is if your student is going to be clean, tidy, um, and clean and tidy enough to live with someone who is really clean and tidy and organized. Um, Transitioning from being at home and going to college, you're in a new place, you're meeting different people, you're away from home, you're joining new organizations. Um, you're in an entirely different academic environment. A lot of change can, bring out those natural tendencies a lot easier than you may think. I know that when I went to college, I had the hope that, I was going to change my ways and be an early riser. I'm pretty typically a late night person, And that was something that I wanted to do. And, um, I felt like trying to make that change, I could live with someone who was, who was really an early riser. But I quickly found out that my natural tendencies came out, and I was sleeping in, and the 8 a.m. classes were not for me. So when we say hold up the mirror with your student, we want you to help them identify their natural tendencies and what their level of commitment to those tendencies are. You know, arriving to campus, being self-aware and realistic about what they're like can help your student be a good roommate and be a good friend. Um, because it won't be easy to hold, to keep up with those new hopes and aspirations of being an early riser like me, if your student is like that. And it's okay to not be an early riser. I think for me, what would have worked better is having a roommate that was also not an early riser, when they were up at 6 in the morning getting things together and I was getting annoyed because the lights were on. If I had been more realistic about things, maybe I would have been on the same page with a roommate. So there's nothing wrong with whichever way that goes with your student, but you want to have them be realistic about what that looks like. So some different just tips about how to start those conversations. Um, Having your student use I statements. You know, I've observed this, I've noticed this, I feel this when talking about these things with someone else. Prompt your student to consider how a certain behavior may work with a roommate in a new living situation. So, these are definitely things I heard from my mom, going into college, joking about, a trail of stuff between the front door and my bedroom, just dropping things off as I go. How do you plan on keeping those things tidy in your new room? Having those conversations with your student may prompt them to think about that. And, well, that's true. I do let my alarm go off 10 times before I get up. Is someone else gonna like that when they're sleeping, 10 feet away from me? Asking questions about changes that your student anticipates making or wants to make when they arrive to campus, and using those conversations to raise their own awareness of the habits that they have, can be really beneficial in just getting their thoughts going when getting prepared to live with someone else. Second superpower is going to be giving them a dose of reality. So, what we mean by this is going into this new environment, new space with some realistic expectations about what that may look like. Um, I think with being a parent, if you're someone who has been to, if you've lived with roommates, if you've been to college, things like that, sharing some things about your experience with your student can be beneficial. Talking about what it means to share a space. A lot of students come here and they've never shared a space with someone else. Having shared spaces with a sibling or, um, you know, living with your parents is one thing, you're with your family, but living with someone that you may not even know can be a completely different experience that, I think it's important that students understand, that it is going to be something new. So, talking with them about their own values and needs and goals and setting the stage for what's to come in living with someone new, can be really beneficial. And talking about roommate agreements, with your student is a good place to start. So when your student gets to their residence hall, they will have, a roommate agreement that residence life will hope that they fill out with their roommate. This will have questions down to what temperature do we want to keep the room at. And a lot of people think that some of these things are redundant or that they don't, that they aren't necessary. Do we really need to talk about if it's going to be 70 degrees or 72 degrees? But those types of things build up over time. And if you've got those things talked out, and filled out on an agreement, you have a place to go if things start to go wrong, and those things can always be reevaluated. So, um, Setting them up and starting these conversations now allows your student to get a head start on what kind of conversations they may be having with their roommate. So, identifying their values, like I said, having those things identified for themselves can help them in the conversations that they're going to have where they're trying to identify that with someone else. So, asking them about their needs from a roommate. So, we've talked a little bit about their own habits. What do they want from a roommate? What do you need from your roommate to help you sustain the things that are going to help you succeed? Um, Ask your student about what their relationship goals are with a roommate. Does your student want to have a roommate that is someone they become best friends with? Does your student want to have a roommate that is just someone that they share a space with? Maybe they study together, they can eat lunch together. Um, I think that's really important. And this is something that comes up pretty often when people have different ideas about what that roommate relationship may look like. Um, I personally I went into my first semester of college and had three random roommates that I didn't know. Um, and my roommate goals, at that time was kind of just to get a dose of new people and have a new experience. I really wasn't looking for, I have to be best friends with these people. Would have been okay if it had gone that way. But if I had gone into that situation hoping, this person's going to be my best friend for sure, and they didn't have that expectation, we could have been at odds, in that part of things. So talk about, having those reality checks about things with, you know, their goals and how those are going to resonate with their roommates' goals and what they need from that. So do you think a curfew at 10 p.m. on weeknights so your sleep schedule can be maintained is gonna be good for you? What if your roommate doesn't like that? What if you've got a roommate who wants to come in, they're not worried about coming in after midnight, 1 a.m.? How do you talk through those things? How do you identify those things when they come up? So helping them clarify what a need is. What does reasonably clean mean to you? No one is going to go into college saying, I'm fine with never cleaning. We'll do whatever. Um, but my definition of clean and someone else's definition of clean may be very different. Cleaning once a week versus cleaning every other day. What does it mean to clean? How are they going to communicate those things to their roommate? Um, and these are the places where this may be the first time that your student is having to ever think about these types of things, having not shared a space with someone in the way that they may share a space on campus, or if they're living off campus at an apartment with roommates. Um, they may think that they have the same definition of clean as someone else, but talking about how you get down to what that really means and clarifying those things with their roommate can be really helpful. And it's helpful to have those things on the front end. So, thinking about when there is some disagreement, or if they have different needs, say that your roommate and their high school best friend, they've got an apartment when they're coming here. They know each other really well, but they get there and one of them, has wants to study in the room. That's going to be their study space, their living room, wherever that may be. But your student can't study at home, doesn't want, their apartment to be a place where they're thinking about school. They're only going to do that at the library. So they're not concerned with having, the quiet downtime type environment. How can they talk about those things and find a compromise, find a middle ground? Um, and a lot of this is, it's going to be on your student to have these conversations, to engage in actually working through this with their roommate. But I think the key to this superpower, giving them the dose of reality, is you you're enabling them to have those conversations and checking in with them first can help them prompt those things, prompt those thoughts before they get into a situation with a roommate, before they're having to have a conversation that they may think is uncomfortable because they haven't had to talk about boundaries in that way with someone else. I think that's where, as parents and family members, you can come in as a superpower with this is kind of getting the wheels turning for them when they before they get here. The third superpower, this is one that I think is really interesting when the conflicts come up. So we kind of started this, um, the anti-hot person as a joke in our office, but I think that it's really important to think about because as a parent or a family member of a student who's especially, in a new space, I think that being there for everything and being that big supporter is one of the most beneficial things that you can do for students. But how can you use this to help them succeed is the key here. Um, I think that when I've thought about the anti-hot person, and how that can be used as a superpower, I think initially I've thought about this with other students. You've got a friend who, and I'm guilty of this with my friends as well. You've got a friend who's got a conflict going on, who has a problem with someone or has this issue happening, and because you're a loyal friend, because you're a parent, because you're a family member, you're on that person, you're on your person's side. You're loyal to them and you're supporting them, and automatically, you're hyping them up. Sometimes though, what's beneficial to actually help someone succeed is to be the anti-hype person. Because whether it's that maybe the person that you're loyal to, your student, your friend is in the wrong, maybe they need to have that dose of reality. And that's where the anti-hype person comes in as helping them be successful. Or really, it's just that someone is escalated and they don't know how to handle the situation. They're emotionally charged about things, and being an anti-hot person in that situation may just be de-escalating. So overall, you're going to be your student's biggest supporter either way, but it's figuring out how to hone in on what type of hot person or anti-hot person you need to be. Um, this is one of those places where you want to lean into your own emotional regulation and communication skills. Um, I think a lot of times students, when they come to you with a conflict, really maybe what is the most helpful is just listening, being that listening ear, hearing them out and being the person who they get to bounce all these ideas off of, to talk about this with. um, it can be really hard not to just want to jump in and protect your student or to act as that hot person. Um, but this can amp up the energy around a conflict. Um, whether it's that your student is emotionally charged, the other student is emotionally charged, they both are. The situation may just be maybe really hard. Maybe they're just not sure how to deal with it. And if you're escalated too, that may make it harder to come down from overall. Um, I think one of the big things with discovering when you need to be an anti-hot person or a hot person is just asking your student, what do you need from me in this situation? And I think that is going to be the key to figuring out where to go next and how to handle this and how to support your student to succeed. So some of the tips in those conversations that you're having with your student when you're trying to figure out what kind of hot person or anti-hot person you need to be is working on your own active listening skills. So asking your student open-ended questions about what's going on, giving them affirmations, reflecting or summarizing back to them, you're telling me this, so I'm hearing this. Is that right? And making sure that that student is able to communicate what they're feeling and asking them what type of support they're looking for. This is also where you're going to be trying to help your student think about those self-care type things, um, and how they can kind of reset and get back to a place where they're able to have these conversations in a healthy way. Um, Thinking about your own emotions, like I said, how they show up in the conversation, we want to make sure that we're using the same types of conversation skills and communication skills that we would want our students to be using. So I think one of the big things is, whatever step you take after your student tells you about a conflict, make sure that it's what your student is comfortable with. Because I know, when I think about how my mom is typically a reactor to certain things, my mom is definitely my biggest hot person. But my mom is not a great anti-hot person. She is. I before I can finish a sentence, she was wanting to call people, and for me though, as much as I know that she was trying to be supportive and help me in every way that she could, that was my worst nightmare. Having her on the phone with, my RD and everyone, trying to call the president and stuff. She's a great hot person. She could work on the anti-hot person skills. But ultimately what we know is that all of you want to be really good supporters to your students, and you are. And part of that is just figuring out what kind of support they need. And this is going to help your student build up their own skills and build up, what they need to be working on and learning on how to advocate for themselves if they want to be. I think that's a, a big skill that, helps in conflict and just in a lot of other places in a new environment like college, helping your student learn to advocate for themselves. So, sometimes the anti-hat person is the biggest hat person. The fourth one is going to be, being your student's coach. So where we're at is we've talked about the conflict. We've talked about, your student has their own values identified, has their goals identified. Um, they know where they're at with their roommate. They've talked through a roommate agreement, but conflict has come up. So we've got to create a game plan. You want to coach your student in their role in winning the game, as as a metaphor. So what a good coach does, whether it's with sports or whatever, whatever you may be coaching your student on, good coaches are going to give feedback. They're going to assist in skill development, and they're going to provide consistent support to that person, that student, their team. So you're trying to figure out what play is going to work the best. So thinking back to our pen model example, where we're trying to figure out how to share responsibilities and keep things clean. We've got that need identified with that student. So they want to ensure that they're not going to have to continue to pick up slack for their roommate on cleaning chores. So let's think through some options on how to do this. You want to be talking to your student about things like setting boundaries, how to address boundaries when they're violated, and working through those difficult conversations. These are conflict skills, these are life skills that are going to help students. Um, and with the help of you as a coach and different UK resources, we can come up with a good game plan. So, for that example with the PIN model where you've identified that need, um, you know, if you think back to the interest that we talked about, maybe the student says, yeah, typically my roommate's pretty good about things, but for the past 3 weeks, they haven't done any chores. Okay, so how are we going to figure out how we keep this space clean and how we keep things fair? Maybe you talk with your student about some different options. If the roommate is supposed to be washing dishes, but they've spent a lot of time away from the room due to whatever else they have going on lately. Maybe instead of focusing on the fact that they haven't been able to wash the dishes, they haven't been home a lot, maybe we reframe what those shared responsibilities look like. Maybe your student's job is to take out the trash. Maybe since their roommate is out of the room a lot, in and out, they don't have time to sit and do the dishes, they're not really making dinners there. Maybe for the next couple weeks, they're going to switch those roles. Maybe the roommate is going to take out the trash for a while because they're in and out. Um, Maybe your student, does the dishes because they're there. They're there the majority of the time. And these are just examples, of things that we see that come up, but bouncing those ideas off your student and talking about those things with them, um, it's less about telling them what to do, what plan to go forward with, but setting up a play that they can execute. Here's what we know about our about the game, what we're trying to win. Here's some different ideas of how we can go forward in a healthy way, in the best way, and then helping your student to achieve that. So in sports, whatever it may be, a coach is responsible for helping players understand their role in achieving the goal of winning the game, or in this case, working through a conflict in a healthy way. So you want to make sure that you're helping your student with providing that feedback, talking through those skills and giving them support in that. So you want to remind them of the root cause of that conflict, using those reflective questioning skills to help your student identify the interests and needs, bringing back in those reality checking skills with your student, um, and then helping them work through the logistics for how they'll address the conflict with the other person. This is something that can go a lot of different ways. Some people really are a lot more comfortable talking about things, you know, as soon as the situation comes up, they bring it to the other person. Some people need some time to chill out. Some people want to talk with the RA present if it's about a roommate issue. Something that I will say that we try to avoid encouraging with students is talking about things over Snapchat, text, things like that, social media. Um, those things um, can create, other issues. But at the end of the day, if your student and the person they're in conflict with are they're most comfortable talking over text, you know, however they can get things sorted out, we want to encourage that. If you want to offer to act out the conversation so they can practice what they're going to say, that can be really beneficial. Just having even a practice conversation may take away some of that uncomfortability that your student may be feeling, because this may be the first time that they've ever had to bring something like this to someone who's in that role, a roommate, a friend, someone in their organization. And these types of conversations are hard, but they are going to develop skills that they need in their future relationships and that can help in other places. And then the last superpower that we have is being a resource hub for your students. So knowing where to go when your student needs additional support. With our office, one of the things that you can do, that students can do, is they can request conflict resolution services from our office on our website, or by emailing us. Um, we provide a lot of different types of conflict resolution services. So we do one-on-one conflict coaching with students. We do facilitated dialogues with students, whether that's one-on-one facilitated dialogue or group facilitated dialogue. We do a lot of restorative justice practices, so like circles or conferences. And then if you get on our website, you'll find our conflict styles assessment, which I think can be really fun to to take with your student and talk about your conflict styles. It gives you your ranking on each style and what that means. And that can be a good place to start, some of these conversations with your student. Hey, let's do this. It takes 5 minutes and talk about what their conflict style is. And I'm sure, especially for parents and family members, learning each other's conflict styles um, would be fun too. So as soon as I took it, I made everyone in my family take it and went through and talked about that for that those can turn into long conversations. So, but they're a good place to start just reflecting on where your student is and what their conflict style may be. And if you have questions about any of those additional services, you can email us, check out our website. Um, and then our office also works with the Office of Residence Life um, pretty frequently on things dealing with roommate conflicts. So you can encourage your student to connect with their RA or their resident director if a conflict does come up. If the conflict is in another area of student life, um, you can encourage them to talk with, if it's an organization advisor, a course instructor, a supervisor. Um, Talking to the people who are there to be resources um, can be one of the best ways to work through things. If there is any kind of conflict that causes an immediate life safety risk, we always encourage, students, families to reach out to UKPD, 911, use those resources as well. If something of that level comes up, we have additional UK resources related to um, to mental health that can help students navigate all kinds of different needs, whether it's just about conflict or whether it's about other things. These provide confidential spaces for students in a lot of ways to work through conflict and to connect them in different areas. So, campus mental health resources like TRACS, the UK Counseling Center. I think Talkspace is going to be something different coming up this year, but there will be a different program for that. CSI is the Center for Support and Intervention. This is non-clinical case management for students. The Academic Ombud can help students with those academic needs. And then this should be OEO, the Office of Equal Opportunity and the VIP Center can also provide safe spaces for students as well for different reporting needs and things like that. Um, One of the big things that we do encourage with students is and family members, when talking about what the uncomfortability that may come with conflict can be, um, there's an important distinction between feeling uncomfortable versus feeling unsafe. To feel unsafe means that a student is, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally in harm's way, and that harm is, actively being caused to one or more people that impacts their safety, well-being, ability to function. This is when we want to bring in UKPD or submit those appropriate referrals to those places on campus. But uncomfortability is something that is probably going to come up, anytime there's a conflict with a student, whether it's with a roommate or someone else. Uncomfortability, they're going to feel out of their element. It may not be an ideal situation, but working through those uncomfortable situations will help your student in the long run build up those skills that they'll use in college and after. Um, so definitely use the resources that are available. Encourage your student to use the resources that are available. I've got our email on here again and our website. Um, if you have questions about our different resources, about what kind of conflict resolution services we provide and what each of those mean. Reach out, let us know. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that may come up. Thank you guys so much for having me. Nancy, I appreciate it. Um, yeah, if anyone else needs anything, if you guys want to drop my contact information in the chat, you can do that as well. But just let me know.
Thanks so much, Molly. That was really good information. So David has put in the Q&A, he said, good information. Is the presentation available to download to print? It would make it easier to review with my students. So I think that's a great idea. And Molly, we can connect offline and get your slides as a PDF maybe to put in the Cat Chat family community. So we'll make sure that that goes with the recording in Cat Chat afterwards.
Yeah.
So appreciate that suggestion, David. Folks, if you've got other questions, use that Q&A feature. I know that this is a little different than some of our more logistical Cat Chat lives that we've done. Hopefully this is just giving you good food for thought. Molly, I'm so glad that you talked about the role of technology in conflicts, because that was something that I had been thinking about as well. I think in some ways, technology allows us the chance to really think about what we're going to say. You know, if we're not sure how we want to phrase something, you know, if you're writing a text or a DM or snap, something like that. But then on the flip side, I think, you know, students will need to, I mean, humans need to build the skill of having civil conflict, working through those things in person. It's a skill that will take folks into the workplace and just through relationships in life. But I can see where students are probably more comfortable relying on that technology initially, but then you can also see where things spiral, you know, screenshots are taken and shared with others. And what are some of the things that you all have seen as you help students navigate some of these conflicts, especially like thinking about the technology piece?
Yeah, I think when conflicts come up, one of the things that I mentioned about roommate agreements, um, there are a lot of questions on those roommate agreements, and part of that may be, how do we want to address something if a problem comes up? Do we want to text about it? Do we want to talk in person? I think ultimately, making sure that, you know, your student, both students, whoever it may be, is comfortable with whichever way they decide to communicate. But I think I agree that the in-person skills are going to go a lot farther, just in where it can take you, not even just with roommates, but other places. It's going to come up everywhere it comes up, in the workplace. But I think, like you said, there can be some advantages to talking about things over text. You get the time, you may have that, okay, let me de-escalate and not just say something off off the wall. But I also have seen, that turn into people deleting certain messages and having and keeping certain messages to make things look different than, the conversation may have actually been. Snapchat, has the messages that disappear, has the pictures that disappear. Um, I think that, now there are so many different ways to be anonymous on social media and through different like forms of technology that we've seen come up. And what makes that hard, and I think one of the most common things that I've seen is after a conflict and when people take things to online, talking about one another, saying mean things about each other. What's really hard for me when dealing with those conflicts with students is that you see the impact that that has on a student, how hard that is for them to have someone, talking about them online or whatever it may be. Um, and it's hard for me and, a representative of the university and our office to have to explain to a student also that people have free speech and that sometimes really mean things you know, are protected by free speech and that they're not nice and that we can work through, how to manage those things and how to manage that behavior, from if it's a student who's doing that. But I think ultimately what I've seen is when things get taken to social media and online, they tend to spiral and people do experience, some harm from that. And that's hard.
Yeah, I think you make a great point about when folks take their conflict to the peer group and start trying to get folks to choose sides. And I think sometimes, I want to give folks the benefit of the doubt. I think sometimes they take it to the friend group like, hey, help me think this through. Like I'm in the right, they're in the wrong. You want somebody to validate your position on it. But then I think on the flip side, that comes off as, hey, I'm talking about you behind your back. And I think
Yeah.
then it starts to spiral, yeah, when the friend gets involved. And so I think that's whereas you so well stated, families can be really helpful in being that sounding board for them and helping them, think through how they want to approach it without maybe getting your group involved and causing some harm. All right, Sandra's got a good question. She asked, will students get something like this during K week? Instead of having the perspective of a parent or support person, a student perspective. I know you all work very closely with the Office of Residence Life, so maybe you could talk a little bit more about how students get some of this information from UK.
Yeah. I don't know about specifics during K Week. I do know that there are at every tabling event that we can show up at, we are at. We have been talking with students at orientation. Um, and we do work really closely with Residence Life and we help train. We just got through resident director training, talking about conflict training with those RDs. And then we also help train student staff, the RAs that work with students. Um, there are certain spaces that we've been in that we do just give like, presentations to students. I've presented in a few UK 101 classes. Um, but really, where I think a lot of the education part that goes to students comes in is trying to help anyone who's interacting with students on a regular basis be prepared and equipped with the skills that we we hope they are. We're hoping that that is one way that we can support students. I would love to be able to get in front of every incoming freshman and talk about conflict because I think it's the biggest part of what I do personally in the office, and I think it's really really important in roommate relationships and other relationships. So any place that I can get in front of students, I do. I don't think that they're I don't know about K-Week in specifics, but students can, if you're interested in something like this for your student, or if your student is interested in something like this, they can reach out and we can do any kind of level of this that a student's interested in, one-on-one or with certain groups. We do talk to student organizations. So we try to get in any place that we can in front of students and provide as much coaching as we're able to.
Yeah, I think there's just those topics that students don't always think they'll need until they do. And so sometimes if we do present things like that at K Week, it's kind of in one ear and out the other. I think of talking to them sometimes about time management and study skills. We want them to be as prepared as they possibly can, but sometimes, unfortunately, it takes a first quiz or a first grade that wasn't as high as they hoped for, and then you got their attention. And I think some of this peer conflict is in that category. They're so focused on making friends and meeting people and all that they're not really thinking about, well, how do I resolve conflict in this relationship later? Like they're assuming that it's all going to be great until it isn't. So we want students to get this information, but sometimes we got to wait a little while until they're more receptive to it. Tracy just asked another question. She said, do you incorporate conflict training into UK 101? And you mentioned being, in communication with some UK 101 classes. I know it's not a part of the curriculum for every section, but, instructors do have some latitude with a few class sessions. So that may be how you've been involved in UK 101 in the past. How many of those UK 101 trainings do you think you do in an average semester?
Um, Last year I did a few. Um, it's mostly been with staff or whoever is instructing those classes that have worked with our office that have been in these trainings that have asked us to come and present. I've done a few of them. Some of my colleagues have done a few of them. Um, I think it's a good space, you know, to get in front of students because it is a smaller like a smaller group of people typically. Um, yeah, anytime that we get invited somewhere, we'll go. So
Yep, absolutely. Appreciate you all are always willing to collaborate and partner to get good information to students and again help them resolve things in a safe, healthy way. Well, I see that we're coming up on our hour, so we'll wrap things up. But Molly, thank you so much for all of this good information that you've shared today. And Kate, thanks for being behind the scenes, dropping those links in the chat. For those, who weren't able to join us the whole time or want to go back and rewatch, the recording will be available in the Cat Chat family community either later this afternoon or at the latest tomorrow morning. But we so appreciate everybody joining us for today's Cat Chat Live and hope this has given you some good food for thought as you support your student moving into their upcoming academic year. So we want to wish everybody the best and hope to see you for a future Cat Chat Live. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.